welcome back to the Broker Life podcast. My name is Mark Panazon, and I'm a mortgage broker with Mortgage Connection. I'm licensed in Alberta and BC and have been doing mortgages for over 15 years. Today's guest is Dawson Mullin, a real estate lawyer in Victoria, BC. Welcome, Dawson.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So let's get into it. So tell me a little bit about yourself and how you ended up in law.
Okay, so a bit about my background then is so I had always planned on going to law school, and no particular reason beyond that. I felt that the degree would open up some doors for me in terms of securing employment. So I completed my undergrad at UVic, wrote the LSAT, began the application process to law school, and just the timing between when I completed my undergrad and when I could start law school in Canada didn't line up too well. So I decided to look at some options abroad. And I had a good friend that went to law school at Bond University in Australia and had a great experience. So I ended up applying there, got accepted, and that's where I did my law school. So it was a great school. It was a private law school, had strong ties to Canadian law schools. And one thing I really liked about it is it offered an expedited program where I could complete 3 years of law school in 2 calendar years. So yeah, I like the sound of that. And so I completed my degree there, and then the plan was always to move back to Victoria to start a practice. And so I moved back, and I had a small amount of equivalency to do just on my transfer back. And while I was completing that, I took a job at my uncle's firm in town to gain some experience. And his firm focuses on real estate law, as my firm does now too, and that's where I was initially exposed to the practice of real estate. So I really enjoyed it, and made the decision early on to make that my focus moving forward. So completed my articles, began working at a firm downtown Victoria for about a year, and then realized that I wanted to do my own thing. So yeah, I decided to open my own shop, and that was so 2011. I started Dawson Mullin Law.
Amazing. So how long have you been in law in total with all of your experience after graduating?
So I graduated law school in 2007, and pretty much started working in the industry right away. I wasn't called to the bar until 2010. So I guess practicing as a lawyer 13
years or so.
But yeah, okay, in the industry for longer than that.
Right on. So maybe you could share what your role is in the real estate transaction for viewers. And I'll be honest with you, I'm pretty honed in on how the mortgage transaction works, and even really on the real estate side of the contracts. But I'm a little bit still of a newbie on what actually happens in your office when you meet with clients. So why don't you kind of just share, when you get mortgage instructions, how do you take over? What's your role in that part?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the main role is to complete the contract of purchase and sale and the mortgage, and make sure the transaction runs smoothly and correctly. So we're reviewing the contract of purchase and sale and title to the property if we're engaged to do so prior to subject removal. It's not always the case. Often unconditional contracts will land on my desk, and our job is really just to take it to completion. We're dealing with local authorities to calculate the adjustments between buyer and seller, for anything that's attached to the property, be it property taxes, utilities, water, sewer, garbage, strata. We deal with all of that. We're advising on ownership structure. So when there's multiple owners, how they want to take title to the property, joint tenancy versus tenancy in common, property transfer tax. We prepare all the financial statements relating to the purchase and the mortgage, all the transfer documents for the parties to sign, all the mortgage documentation. And yeah, we arranged for the transfer and mortgage to be registered, of course, on the completion date at land title. We're in charge of the collection and the movement of all the monies in the transaction. So your mortgage funds, the monies moving between buyer and seller. If there's outstanding amounts to, say, property taxes or strata that need to be cleared, we take care of that. And then yeah, so I guess back to your point about once we receive instructions, so we'll get a package typically from the realty office, so the contract, the conveyance package, and then the mortgage broker like yourself will arrange to have the lender send the mortgage instruction package to our office. So once we have these two packages of documentation, we get a file open and started. We're in touch with the clients to gather all the information that we need to complete the purchase and mortgage documents, and then we're organizing a signing appointment with the client, and it's at that appointment will typically occur within a week of closing. And we sit with the client and we review all the paperwork and we get everything signed up, and we'll be advising the client on how much money is needed to complete the transaction as well. And that's, so they've already put down a deposit, so that we're considering like balance of down payment, property transfer tax if applicable, and yeah, legal fees, closing costs as required by the lender. And then the client would typically just bring that sum into the signing appointment in the form of a bank draft. And then, yeah, once the signing is complete, we essentially take over the transaction from there. And then most of the closing process will happen on the completion date, when we're transferring the ownership at land title and registering that new mortgage, and then moving the funds necessary to complete the transaction to the seller's law office. And at that point is when the transaction's essentially complete. And then we're notifying all the parties, including the realtors who typically handle the key exchange.
So basically, we'd be pretty screwed without lawyers.
Yeah. I mean, we're tasked with the responsibility of really kind of pulling the transaction together and just getting it to the finish line on time. So
yeah. Now, what's the difference between a solicitor and a notary?
Well, one's a lawyer, one's a notary. So there's a big education difference there.
Can notaries close real estate transactions like lawyers?
They
Or
can complete real estate transactions so long as they're non-contentious. In the event that a problem was to arise, and they would have to refer that out to a lawyer who's really the only one that's qualified to advise in that type of circumstance.
so they're more like title officers or administrators, where they can proceed with the instructions, but they really can't give advice or act on anything. So probably not in their best interest to use a notary on something big like a purchase transaction.
Yeah, I agree, but I'm obviously quite biased there.
Sure.
But I think why not use a lawyer that can provide you with that comprehensive level of service. And people get it in their heads that notaries are a much cheaper alternative to a lawyer, but that's just a misconception. And
Mm.
I always advise my if people are calling me looking for a quote on a transaction, to try calling around a little bit, and you'll find that they're often charging the same, if not more than lawyers in some cases.
Hmm. Interesting. So paying the same price for no advice and really no ability uh, to deal with any issues that may arise. Um, in terms of like the what happens in the lawyer signing meeting and then what happens behind the scenes, would you say most of the work is behind the scenes when you're reviewing the contract, reviewing the terms, and then really the when you meet with your clients, sort of as I do, it's more of just like a quick signing or maybe explanation of all the terms and conditions and then signing. But really, you're doing all this legwork behind the scenes with dealing with all the different municipalities or areas of interest. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. I would, yeah, I would agree 100%. 90% of the transaction happens behind the scenes. It's only
Yeah.
that, small half an hour, appointment where we're going over all the closing paperwork and reviewing and taking the signatures. Um, and then, any communications with the client that have taken place up into that, that point. I try to be quite involved in the process and available to my clients. But yeah, still at the end of the day, that's a small piece of the transaction. Most of the work is gonna happen behind the scenes without direct involvement of the client.
How much contact do you typically have with mortgage brokers or banks alike in a real estate transaction?
I work closely with my referral partners, realtors and mortgage brokers. I think it's very important. We're all working to the same goal. The goal is to get the transaction to the finish line as smoothly and as efficiently for the client. The best way the best way to achieve that is for all the stakeholders to be communicating and working together. And I think it's in a lot of cases, a simple phone call from me to the broker, we can work things out without having to involve the client and stress you know and panic them. I mean, sometimes it's unavoidable, but yeah. So I think it's I'm often dealing with the various parties to the transaction, and lenders too. We're constantly going back and forth with the funder who's going to ultimately send us the money, and we're satisfying all the solicitor requirements. So you as the mortgage broker, you're dealing with the underwriter, we deal with the funder, right? But if something needs to change regarding that mortgage, it's really only the underwriter that can make that happen. I don't have direct communication with that person. So I'd pick up the phone and say, hey, Mark, we have a situation here, and we just try to work it out.
What is a real estate contract?
So it's a um, well, it's a standard form contract in my line of work, between contract of purchase and sale between a buyer and seller. So most, and I say standard form, so most realtors are using a real estate contracts that have been provided by the BC Real Estate Association. So, and it's the BC Real Estate Association that's working with the different real estate boards within the province, lawyers, other industry experts, to draft and update these contracts on a regular basis. So they're constantly evolving and being tweaked over time. So I often am engaged to review these contracts for for my clients, and I mean, the key is to completing this step prior to subject removal, of course, right? As once the contract's unconditional, that creates a legal obligation for the parties to complete the transaction and fulfill the terms of the contract. So most contracts are, are pretty standard. Sometimes there's some kind of wonky terms in there that need to be ironed out in advance of subject removal. But yeah, the standard form contracts are not bad. It's the from a client perspective, the non-standard form contracts that can be more problematic, in my opinion. For example, like developer contracts, new construction contracts, because they don't use standard form. Every developer, they have their own template, their own form of contract that they like to use, and they're all different. They're all heavily skewed in favor of the developer. So yeah, it's normally a good idea for to engage a lawyer to review these contracts and highlight anything that may be of concern or out of the ordinary.
So just to clarify, you're referring to whether someone's buying a resale home that's already been built, and that's a standard contract that's created by BCREA, or building a brand new home, in which case the developer creates the contract.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay, interesting. Are there any legal implications of a breach of contract? I guess some of the common issues that would come across my desk is if we can't complete conditions on time. So let's just say the condition date is 2 weeks out and we need to verify the standard income down payment credit, everything that is part of our role. And at any given time, one of those might be hard to verify. I'm working on a file right now where clients are moving from Germany to Canada, to Cranbrook area, and they have a gifted funds from Germany, and the funds won't be here before conditions. And so the clients have this sort of, I have this obligation to share with them that if you don't meet all the conditions, you're going to be at risk. What exactly is that risk? I define the risk as, well, you could lose the home, but probably more importantly, you could lose your deposit that you've put down. Is there any more risk that you see on your side if someone were to lift conditions and then the bank can't actually proceed with the application? How does that work?
Well, yeah, I mean, it puts so this is assuming that the buyer has removed their conditions and then runs into an issue after the fact and
Yeah,
potentially
exactly.
can't complete. Yeah, then they're in a breach of contract position, and it's not a good position to be in. You're kind of forced to um, negotiate an extension, which does not have to be granted, assuming the deal can even be pulled together. Um, and it's normally, you've got two parties that are under contract and want to make a deal happen, so they cooperate, but they don't have to. And if a buyer's in a position where the seller says no, we expect completion, buyer's not able to deliver, well then yeah, they could lose their deposit, they could be on the hook for further damages, costs incurred by the seller as a result of that breach. Um, the seller could turn around and be forced to sell the property to another party and sell it for a lower price point, which means that the defaulting original buyer could be on the hook for that difference in sale price. So
Mhm.
yeah, there's some big exposure there. So yeah, it's important to have your ducks in a row and be prepared to honor the terms of that contract.
Something that's a little bit new for me since I'm a newbie in BC, are conditionless approvals. Obviously, the real estate market in BC is greatly different than in Alberta. I would argue that there's probably not that many multiple offers, depending on the time of the market in Alberta versus BC. It just seems like almost every major area or community, they're all hot markets, and everything's going to multiple offers, which is forcing buyers to go in with no conditions, no financing conditions, no sale of previous home conditions. Can similar situations arise in these scenarios where there's a conditionless offer where maybe financing is required, but it's not placed as a condition? Or is it more of a scenario where folks actually don't need financing and it's really just the super rich that can afford, I shouldn't say the super rich, but the folks who perhaps don't need the financing in general to make it work. So I'm just kind of curious on what the implications are for breach of contract in sort of multiple offer situations and conditionless
Well,
options.
yeah, I think the same risk there, right? And it's ultimately the market kind of dictates how buyers need to approach these deals. I mean, it was a year ago where, well, and throughout the pandemic there, when the market just went bonkers, and it was really difficult for buyers to include any conditions, regardless of whether they needed them. So, yeah, it was rolling the dice to some extent, hoping that, okay, yeah, you're going to make an offer, you're going to forego a building inspection, there's risk there, you may need financing, you don't have time to secure it. Um, you need insurance. You haven't looked into insurance. I saw that a lot over the pandemic, where a client would be at my office saying, "Well, what are you talking about? We need insurance." Well, it's a mortgage requirement. Well, we didn't know about that because a lot of those conversations weren't happening before I got involved because eh, yeah, there was just no conditions. You had to move quick. You had to move, you weren't able to complete your due diligence. And as a result, a lot of things got missed. And I found buyers just weren't as prepared as they needed to be, and were often scrambling to get organized. But yeah, I mean, you need to sell your home, you need a mortgage, you've gone in without conditions, that doesn't happen, you're in a bad place, and you're putting yourself at risk, and potentially exposing yourself to some serious financial consequence.
In your 13 years of experience, would you say that comes across your desk often, or is it more of a once in a while sort of situation?
Once in a while. Yeah. I
Okay, so
probably
people are, go ahead.
yeah, I've done upwards of 15,000 transactions in 13 years. And it really does not happen often. I mean, delays happen quite often and little issues, but again, as long if the parties are willing to, be understanding and cooperate and make a deal happen, we normally get these things resolved. I mean, so in some cases, yeah, it can't be, and it's clear there's going to be a breach by one of the parties. Well, in that event, I'm kicking the file out of my office normally to a litigation counsel,
Mm.
who will take over and advise the client from there.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to know. I guess one point for humanity, for people trying to work things out together and not just in it for themselves and trying to maybe sue or something in that regard.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there can be suing. You kind of mentioned there could be further damages if there's issues in contracts or break of contracts. Is misrepresentation a thing in real estate contracts if properties um, are maybe said to be one thing, but then they realize it's something else? I don't know if this comes up or not,
Yeah.
but what do you think about that?
Yeah. Yeah. You see it, and the issues that I normally see, they're divided into a couple categories, right? So you've got your pre-completion issues, and I see those most often as uh, as things that create delays, right? Be it buyer financing, be it the buyer's cash component to complete. It's tied up in an online bank somewhere. They're drawing from RSPs, delay in insurance. The mortgage provider, the lender is delayed for whatever reason, or on the selling side, maybe there's a delay with clearing title, right? You're waiting on some payout discharge statements. So those are the normal pre-completion issues that I see. But yeah, post-completion, yeah, we see, failures to disclose, misrepresentations that could occur not just in the contract, but sometimes you'll see it in the MLS listing, right? The MLS listing represents the property to be uh, a certain size, or to have a, a heat pump in good working order, right? And or yeah, the seller is making some sort of representation through the contract or warranty, maybe about appliances, or through the property disclosure statement. So yeah, you do see those things, and the misrepresentations typically will pop up after the fact, leaving a buyer, say, with the only recourse at that point, it would be to pursue the seller, um, start an action and pursue them for damages in court.
Interesting. Okay. So
Yeah,
it can happen, does happen, but just not that frequently. Most people are trying to work things out.
yeah, yeah, that's right.
So I have a couple different topics I wanted to touch on, which are interesting to me. One is leaseholds, and the other one is spousal buyouts. Um, Leaseholds are fairly new to me. Again, it seems to be a little bit more of a BC thing than Alberta. Not unusual in Alberta, but I think it feels like it's more common. Uh, what is a leasehold, and what are some of the positives and negatives of a leasehold from your vantage point?
Well, yeah, it's a good question, and it's a leasehold's a unique type of ownership. So it means you own the right to use the property for a fixed period of time. You don't you don't have any ownership interest in the unit or the land, say, with a typical freehold type of ownership. Um, so when a buyer purchases a leasehold property, they're purchasing the remaining term of that lease, and it's always a finite period of time. Be 50 years, 99-year leases are common. Um, so they're and I don't deal with them too often, but they do pop up from time to time. They're they're often, I guess, generally speaking, considered inferior investments to freehold in the long run, because at the end of the lease, there's the value of the investment is essentially nil, usually. Um, However, leasehold properties, they're typically priced more favorably too, right? And you may have a buyer that's where they don't have a lot of money and they're not concerned about the length of term on the lease. Maybe they're an elderly client, and they don't care about having an asset at the end of the day. They're not concerned about the legacy. So it could be the right move for them.
So is the lease contract between uh, the landowner and the building owner?
So usually you have a lease between the landowner, a head lease, and the landlord. And then you have a sublease between the landlord and the buyer of the leasehold property.
Okay.
And when these leasehold properties get transferred, you're essentially assigning that sublease, but the head lease remains intact for whatever the term remaining on that lease is. You know,
Okay. So if the lease is between the landlord and the landowner, and that lease, let's say, is 99 years, and there's 5 years remaining on this lease, assuming this happens, at the end, someone decides to purchase a unit in that building, and they have a 25-year amortization. That lease is going to be up in 5 years. What happens? Does the owner of the unit have to negotiate that sublease with the landlord, or
it, it would be the landlord negotiating with the owner for, and maybe the lease contemplates some sort of renewal provision, right? But that's the risk. I mean, there's no guarantee that the lease is going to be renewed, which could leave the sub lessor, say the buyer, in a bit of a predicament where you know they don't have a property at the end of the term, and good luck
interesting?
financing that one with 5 years left on the lease.
Yeah, interesting. So it's to the landlord's benefit to have a longer lease with the landowner, and ensure that that lease remains at least 25 years or longer, and do negotiations maybe when it gets to that. And if it does creep a little lower than that, like you said, good luck buying or selling those units. Um, and in the event that they can't come to an agreement on a lease, which I don't know how often might actually happen, do all the unit holders or all the people living in the building, do they get kicked out? Do they have to pay off their mortgages and move on?
Yeah, they would if the lease is not renewed and the term is expired, then yeah, essentially the right to occupy is terminated.
No way. Does that actually happen?
Um, not not normally. Normally
Okay.
these are renewed, but it can. There's some there's some mobile home parks in and around the Songhees near my office where the Songhees are taking back that land and redeveloping it, and people are forced to essentially relocate their trailer or give it up. So it can happen. It's not common.
Understand. That's fascinating to me. So leaseholds present an interesting predicament. You can, in this market, when real estate prices are quite elevated, you can get a better deal and get into a unit for, maybe 100,000 less or something. But there could be multiple issues depending on negotiations with the actual lease and the term of the lease, and that's very interesting. So seems like these aren't really transactions that are ideal for most people. If you can avoid it, avoid it. But maybe a first-time home buyer wants to buy a condo, it might be priced pretty aggressively, and so that's maybe one way to enter the market, but it comes with risk, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I don't think you would see many first time home buyers looking at a leasehold property. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
agree with you.
So the second big topic that has been interesting specifically over COVID is spousal buyouts. I can't tell you how many past clients of mine or new clients would give me a call and say, my wife and I or my husband and I are separating, things aren't going well. How do we get out of this mortgage and property? And I do feel like it was a COVID related issue because people were sort of, you know, um, dare I say, forced to be next to their spouse more than they'd like. And issues started to arise. And I've been doing this probably about as long as you. I think it's 15 years or so for myself. And I can't remember having more spousal buyout contracts than I did the past 2 years. So that's my take on it. What is a spousal buyout? And is it common? Do you see it often?
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, we've seen it regularly throughout the years, but there certainly seems to be an uptick in that type of transaction. And I think you're right. The pandemic had a lot to do with that. A lot more separations happening out there. So essentially the transaction is one spouse is refinancing or assuming an existing mortgage and buying out the other spouse in exchange for their interest in the property. So um, I'm often the one that's there's a new mortgage involved, so I'm doing the refinance and representing the spouse that's going to be receiving the interest in the property. So this type of scenario is with a spousal, there's always a need for separate legal representation between spouses. It's a clear conflict of interest. We'd be we'd prepare all the mortgage and transfer documentation, say for the spouse that's taking over, and then we would prepare a package for the spouse that's coming off title, to send to them for them or to their legal representative for them to receive independent legal advice on the transaction and to facilitate the execution of documents on their end as well.
Hmm. So the biggest benefit of a spousal buyout is that you can refinance up to 95% of the value. And in a typical refinance, it's 80% of the value. So you can get way more equity out of your home to be able to process this. So that's great. Doesn't seem like there's a lot of downside.
So that's interesting. So the lenders will view that transaction, which is essentially a refinance and a transfer, as a purchase in
Yeah.
terms of
A high
the
ratio, yeah.
yeah, yeah, no, so that's no, that's a good option for sure.
So I guess the downside or some of the challenges we have with these types of applications is they're fresh. Husband and wife are 6 months into this separation, and they want out, and things are moving fast. And typically, one of the conditions that lenders set up is a separation or divorce agreement. Do you ever see scenarios where you can proceed with a spousal buyout without that document?
Without a separation agreement,
Yeah.
um,
Do you
no,
need it?
well, normally it's a financing requirement, as you know,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? Um, but then, in my experience, lenders are not very picky on what that agreement looks like. So, it doesn't necessarily need to be drafted by lawyers. It
Mhm.
could be a one pager, that's notarized. And I've
Okay.
seen that work with lenders. Um, on the legal side too, we're completing a title transfer, and there's often property transfer tax implications. And there is an exemption for a transfer due to a marital breakdown. But in order to claim that exemption, we're having to attach a separation agreement to the property transfer tax return. Again, um, the property transfer tax office isn't that picky on how that agreement looks either. So yeah, normally it needs to happen, but does do the parties have to go spend thousands of dollars drafting a separation agreement with family law counsel? Not necessarily. Um,
Yeah.
it might be a good idea to do so if they want to have an agreement that's going to protect their interests moving forward. But a lot of parties, they don't seem to be too concerned about that. They just want to do what they need to do to get the transaction done.
Do you see, does your office help with drafting up separation agreements, or is that a different sort of practice?
Yeah, no way. Yeah, we're conveyancing lawyers, not family lawyers. So
So that's under family law. Okay, got it.
yeah, so will assist in a conveyance capacity only. We're not advising on family law. If the need arises, we'll refer the client out. A lot of times they already have family law lawyers involved, so we're liaising with them a little bit. But no, we won't be providing any family law counsel at all.
I have also heard of exceptions to the separation agreement. If there's no children involved, sometimes lenders will condition for a stat deck to just confirm there's no spousal or child support payments going either way. And you're right, it does seem like there's just one or two things that lenders really care about, and they're not so much interested in the rest of the separation agreement. Um,
Yeah.
from my experience, but that's interesting. One other thing around sort of relationships is when people enter into a contract, is there a clear difference between a husband and a wife and two common law partners when they enter into purchasing a home?
Um,
In terms of like, what their entitlements are, and then if there is a breakdown, who's entitled to what, or is it
well,
the same? Is it different?
we're entering into the realm of family law now.
Yeah, we
But,
are. Okay.
yeah, but no, I mean, you can be married spouses and common law spouses, as defined under the Family Law Act, and be treated, yeah, the same under the eyes of the law.
Okay. Okay. I want to talk about lenders a little bit. So when I switched from CIBC to Mortgage Connection as a mortgage broker for 10 years at the bank, we knew how to do things one way, and that was through our CIBC underwriting center, to the funding office, send it to the lawyer, and this is our process, and we don't veer away from this process, just like any one institution wouldn't. And then when I jumped on to the broker side of the channel, it seemed like there was different ways of doing things, certainly different lenders, different products, different policies. Do you have a preference on who you deal with? and you don't have to drop names here, but big banks or credit unions or non-banks, monolines, etc.
Um, from from the lender standpoint, like, banks, credit unions, the monolines, we're used to dealing with them all. Yeah, sure, some are easier than others, but once you know their little quirks and nuances, it's pretty straightforward. From But yeah, I find when dealing with the mortgage person specifically, that often the transactions, at least in my experience, seem to run a little more smoothly when a mortgage broker is involved versus someone at the bank, which um, may not have the knowledge and experience, and like you said, they're very kind of limited in what they can offer. Like when you were at CIBC, I'm sure they had some great products, but that was it, right? So you were pretty stuck in what you could offer your customers, right? I think that's one of the great things about being a mortgage broker is I don't know how many lenders you have access to, and how many different products, but I feel like you can provide a much more, you know, comprehensive, level of service and advice to your clients without being kind of pigeonholed by the parameters of your lending institution.
Yeah, you nailed it there. One of the main differences is kind of comparing the lawyer to notary example is we're licensed individuals and we have to take annual tests. I didn't have to do anything when I started at CIBC. I think I read maybe a manual and had my first customer at like 2 o'clock, and it was learn as you go. Now I do think the banks have caught up a little bit and are training better, but I feel like I learned so much in my first year of brokering compared to my 8 years as a mortgage specialist. It is a vastly different experience. So that's kudos to us, and thank you for the I guess the warm compliment about working with brokers and the experience, because we value that, and we know we add more value, and so it's nice to hear. And it is also interesting to hear about your view on the different types of lenders that work with you. So really, it's more of just a product of learning process, and then it's not really a big difference for you. You can work with whomever you like, and it's just understanding the process. So the size of company doesn't seem to be a big deal, or the nuances within the company itself.
Well, no, I mean, like I said, when you've done as many transactions as we have, we're super familiar with all the lenders. Now, if you were a a lawyer that just kind of dabbled in real estate, and a First National mortgage came across their desk, they'd probably start freaking out and panicking, versus a Royal Bank mortgage. But I mean, but once you've dealt with each of these different lenders, like I said, you just you learn how to deal with them, what to expect. You've got systems in place, and yeah, there's not many lenders that come across my desk now that rattle me.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting, because there's lenders that rattle me. I found I don't want to stereotype, but I do. It does seem like the smaller lenders rattle me a little bit more than the bigger lenders. But that's not to say that the big banks don't irritate me sometimes as well, because sometimes it's a slower moving machine dealing with the big six bank than it is with the smaller ones. But it is a funny sort of engagement to try and figure out who the best options are. And sometimes I think folks are quite surprised on who I would recommend as some of the best lenders. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's easy to figure out, But aside from that, that's interesting. I want to ask you one more question here, which is, what is one tip that you would give somebody looking to enter the real estate market, say in BC or Victoria? Whether they're deciding to plunge into real estate. And this is maybe more from your standpoint, not necessarily market values or interest rates or anything, but from your standpoint, something that you can help prepare buyers to get into the market. What's one tip you would give them?
So just a buyer looking to enter the market. I mean, I think engage professionals, engage them early on, get a good realtor that you trust, find a mortgage broker, you know, get that, get that education and advice in advance, so you know what to expect, and to help you be prepared. We, if there's any, typically you don't have to speak with a lawyer at that point in time until there's some sort of live deal, in which case I always encourage buyers to, if they have any questions or concerns about their contract or the title or anything to do with the transaction, then to have that conversation early on. You don't want to be, in a situation where you're making an unconditional offer, or you've got a conditional offer accepted, you've lifted your conditions, then you decide, well, you've got some questions and concerns that you want to talk to the lawyer about. You kind of shoot yourself in the foot that way. So, find a solid team of professionals that you trust, and involve them early.
All good points, my friend.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to end the call with something that I've been doing with all my guests, which is called the speed round. This is just a fun way to end the call. I have a bunch of questions, this or that questions, and hopefully this kind of just allows people to see a little bit more who you are, and learn a little bit more about yourself. So are you ready?
Sure.
Okay, and you don't have to explain yourself. This is just gut feelings on the top of your head. First question, house or condo?
House.
Fixed or variable?
Ooh, fixed now, but historically variable.
Yeah, that's a common answer. Coffee or tea?
I like both, but coffee earlier on in the day.
Yeah, fair. Lift weights or run?
Lift weights all day.
Oh, big gym junkie, are you?
I try to get in daily. Yeah.
Yeah, good,
I
good.
need to do more cardio. Having said that.
Cardio is important. I'm reading a book called Outlive right now by Dr. Peter Tia. It's a fantastic book about longevity and lifespan. And he has a cool little segment in there about the appropriate amount of cardio and weight training to help you basically live longer, but live well longer. So, flip that to you later. That's a sidebar, but it's important. Yeah. So morning or evening?
Morning.
Clearly, right? Up at 3 a.m. today.
That's right.
That is a morning person. That might actually be in the realm of a night person. It depends how you look at it, I guess. What's the cutoff there?
Yeah, it can go both ways.
BMW or Mercedes?
BMW.
What's your favorite pastime or hobby?
Traveling.
Any particular favorite travel spots? Like to mix it
No,
up.
anywhere new.
Yeah, like that. What music are you listening to these days?
Well, surprisingly country, and I never was too into it, but my wife's a huge fan, so yeah, so she's got me into it.
Yeah, we align there, not in the sense that I love country, but my wife does love it as well.
Yeah.
Last one. What's the last book you read, or your favorite book?
Oh, favorite book. Oh, there's a few. Well, Shantaram is one of them for sure.
Tantaran. What's that about?
Well,
Fiction or nonfiction?
it's fiction, but it's about a guy that, and I won't ruin the book, but you'd read this on the back of the cover, but escapes from prison in Australia and moves to India, to Bombay, and it's just all about his life there. And I just found it to be a fascinating book. Highly recommend.
Good one. Last question. Where can people find you?
Usually at my office. Yeah. Yeah, my second home. But yeah, we've got our office is just on Admirals Road in View Royal. So, nice and central. And that's what I really like about this location. I've got, it's easy for clients coming from Langford, downtowns, the peninsula. And yeah, this is where you'll find me.
Do you have an online presence?
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a website. I don't use social media that routinely for business purposes anyway. But yeah, no, it's easy to locate me.
And what's your website address?
So www.realestatelawyervictoria.com or dawsonmullinlaw.com works as well.
Perfect. Well, thanks for doing this today, Dawson. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mark.